had to use it. I mean, it was really, I thought, an admirable expression of emotion. Even before the final agreement was signed, I think people anticipated that this was going to get a deal done.
I'm showing some pictures that I shot in Paris that give you a flavor of what it was like inside the Blue Zone mostly. And that these will just run while we talk.
Well, it's very gracious of you to share those pictures, but lacking in the kind of originality I was hoping for with the verbal pictures you would paint, and relying a little heavily on technology here. Let's come back to what I have probably a half a dozen questions about that really is kind of at the core of what's on a lot of people's minds, and that is, it's kind of a two-part question. How much of what needs to occur must occur, or should occur, or will occur at the state and local level? How much of this will occur? Hunter, you had some remarks about that at the lowest grassroots level. How much of the real accomplishment that needs to take place has to take place at the federal or the national level globally? And I think the second part of the question that I see running through these cards is, and what can we do? Or what can I do? What collectively is expected of us? And again, Hunter touched on a couple of key points there, but let's come back this way, starting with Senator Worth, and talk about this question of state, local action and how it's going to impact.
Well, there's an expression I think that's very useful is what rules have to get changed. I mean, throughout the whole energy system, there are a series of rules that are really embedded by the incumbents. You know, the coal companies, the utility companies, the home builders, you know, running all the way through is one rule after another. And some of those are local, some are state, some are federal. And we have to understand that we really have to look at those, have to get really good people on the PUC, have to get very good people on a city council, you know, to look at each of these rules and to see what kind of sense they make and knock those down. So, Mark, you know this. I mean, this is just, it's very, I keep saying these are complicated and difficult, but this is the hard work, and it's also, I will say, extremely satisfying when you knock off one of these and you get the incumbents get out of the way, you know, for what has to be done. So that's in answer to the first part of it. Second part of your question is, how do we think about the future? And it seems to me there are a number of avenues that have been opened up by Paris for a lot of discussion among a lot of us. One, Bill was talking about, Hunter's talking about, and that's divest. I do not know of a single movement that has as much energy and as much specificity as the divest movement does. More people can rally around that for all of the right reasons with very clear intellectual honesty. You don't have to, you can leave your ideology aside. What does the world look like? As Hunter says, you got to leave it in the ground. We have to do that. The divest movement has enormous political power, it seems to me, and is a great avenue for engaging young people. The second item that comes out of this, it seems to me, that was really underscored is the rich-poor gap. And that is now entering American politics. You know, it hasn't happened in a long time, but it's now front and center. It's very much a part of the climate movement, and it's the way in which I think all of us, you know, have to view our people who are running for public office, and how committed are they to looking at these kinds of equities. And we all know that this is a really skewed society. How much are we willing to admit it and really take this on? So I think that Paris brings out, one, that very specific divest organization, and second, the power of the rich-poor divide, and what are we going to do about it, and how we address that in a whole lot of different ways.
So the question, I think, in part is about what state and local governments can do, and in Paris they called those subnationals. So I was kind of there representing subnationals, and we formed our own protest group because we think that's a name that makes us sound inferior. And just a joke. So anyway, we were subnationals, and the answer to that, it depends on where you are. But if you look at places like Australia, where the national government came in and reversed out of carbon pricing policy, and somewhat hostile to it, That's, that makes the states, the federation, right, the states, the locals, much more important in trying to deliver on the goals that Australia is going to file or Australia filed, right? In Canada, you just had regime change with the Trudeau government replacing Harper, and that's a very significant change in Canada because very progressive, and it's a place where we like to think we can partner with Canada in a variety of ways, and that was a pretty positive thing. And so there were representation from a variety of provinces in Canada talking about what they were doing apart from what the national government was doing, and how Canada could meet its goals based upon what the provinces were doing. They're probably not going to have to do that now with Justin Trudeau as the Prime Minister, but certainly it was a possibility. You have in the UK, I think 60 different members of Parliament who are hostile to climate change issues and downright deniers. So there is an element in places like that even that we consider fairly progressive and are doing a lot. And so cities in the United Kingdom, but particularly in England, are very important to the conversation. In the United States, we think states and cities together. And you have Jerry Brown there, the 7th largest economy in the world, saying we have legislation taking California to a 50% renewable energy standard by 2030 as part of the delegation of the United States, talking about the important role. It is kind of embarrassing to be an American and to understand that out of all that I just said, the United States Senate and the United States House are the only political bodies still run by majorities that basically are doing nothing except stymieing a debate or stymieing even a conversation about how we make progress or how we go forward. So I would say in the United States, the role of subnationals, cities and states, is heightened because of our Congress, because of who's in the Senate and who's in the House. And we simply have to do all we can to support the President, support the Environmental Protection Agency, and support states, both Republican governors and Democratic governors, who are doing what they can to look at how they move forward on the Clean Power Plan.
When I think about this question, I realize that our entire economy, the rules and regulations that Senator Wirth referred to, have been formed by and for the fossil energy era, or the carbon era. So there's a tremendous amount of reinvention and reform that needs to take place. And to put a finer point on what Senator Wirth said, it's states and localities that have most of the legal authority to make those changes, whether it's utility regulation or land use zoning in cities or transportation planning or many other authorities. Most of them exist at the state and local level. The other thing that's important, I think, about local action, I believe this is, I don't have any evidence of this, but I think localities are better trusted than the federal government, especially among the conservative crowd. So they feel as though they have more influence, I think, on local governments. But what's happened over the years is the lack of progress on the international level. If there's a silver lining in 21 years of negotiations until we got to Paris, if there's a silver lining, it's that it pushed the responsibility for action down to lower levels of government. And in the United States, because the federal government wasn't doing enough, that level became states and localities. And that's why we have today more than 30 states with RPSs and many, many other policies that Governor Ritter has helped develop and helped other governors develop. We have a lot of state and local leadership and a lot of state and local authority. The last thing I'll say about us subnationals is we've got to vote. We've got to vote. Colorado's a swing state. In many people's estimation, this state has got to stand up and say it's unacceptable for any elected official not to acknowledge and aggressively address these problems.
More questions?
Bill Becker sort of stole my thunder a little bit because I was going to respond also to the question about what can we do. It's a question I get all the time. Well, that's all well and good, but what can I do? What can I do? Well, I have a very simple one-word answer for everybody. Vote. Just vote. Critically think about candidates, support causes, and vote.
Wholly insufficient.
Wholly insufficient.
Necessary, wholly insufficient.
But
It's like your question about did you take a plastic fork? What do you do with your life every day? Think about everything you do.
Well, it's the wrong question.
Yeah, have you changed out your light bulbs?
Oh, have we changed out our generation system? Forget
It's-
the frickin' light bulbs, and when are we gonna get rid of the coal plants?
All right.
Leslie's right.
Thank you, Leslie. But the question, who took a plastic fork is the wrong question.
Yeah.
The question is, what did you do with the fork after you took it? Did you recycle it or not? There are- Leslie, we'll chat. Several questions here this evening about carbon tax and carbon fees and leveling the playing field and the most.
Markets.
Well, take that on.
A tax will very reliably raise revenue. And economists love it because it's very predictable in how much revenue it will raise. It will not predictably reduce carbon emissions. Unless you get your price elasticity right, you get the tax high enough that it actually bites and it's worth doing something about the carbon as opposed to simply paying it. If you put a cap on how much carbon can be emitted and then allow companies to trade within that, you will reliably reduce carbon at a predictable rate, particularly if you have a declining cap. And it works. It's working in the New England states with RGGI. It's working in California. California is building its economy through its cap and its trading systems. So if you like taxes, and one of the reasons the Republicans have been calling for, oh, well, I guess we got to have a carbon tax, is because they know it's dead on arrival. Americans hate taxes. Let's get real. Let's put a cap on carbon, put a market in place. If I'm inefficient and I have to buy Bill's efficiency, he benefits, I'm paying more, I'm going to go, wait a minute, I'm going to start cutting my carbon too. At the point at which everybody's cut their carbon, you don't need the market anymore. You have just solved the problem. And at this high-level meeting of the corporates, they agreed that a reasonable price on carbon is somewhere around $60 a ton. This is the corporates calling for a very significant price on carbon.
So there are a couple of other questions that are a little difficult to weave together, but one of them relates specifically to the engagement or involvement, if any, of North Korea in Paris. And I don't know the answer to the question of whether North Korea had a delegation there, but I'll build on that a little bit by asking about North Korea and perspectives on that, and then on just a general reaction on
Why
which
do we
countries.
care about North Korea?
Well, why do we?
No, I mean, I don't understand. I mean,
You're not in
there are
a-
there are 20 countries in the world that make a difference in terms of mitigation issues. In Paris and a climate negotiation, why do we, I mean, maybe there's a good reason for caring about, no, I mean,
Well, they just tested a nuke.
what does that have to do with
Nothing,
climate negotiations?
nothing, you're right, but they just tested a nuke.
As I understand their position, is that the nuclear winter is the answer to global warming.
Enough said. Leadership among the leaders, leadership among the leading nations. What are your quick reactions to what did you observe? Which of the nations did you observe as the leaders among the leaders, and who are the nations that the handful of nations that we can really look forward to holding this together and moving it forward? And are there any nations that are a bit of a surprise on that list?
Well, I think you probably knows as much about this as anybody in the room, but he just told me to go ahead. So, you know, we already said, right, that it all falls apart without the United States being there and having the president go there at the beginning of it was really significant. The two agreements with China over the last 16 or 18 months were really an important part of it. So the Chinese were there, certainly, and that was absolutely critical to it. The Chinese had a forum that was full. Their pavilion was full all the time. It was just adjacent to the United States pavilion. I'm on the Energy Foundation board. We do about $45 million of funding for clean energy programs in China, so I spent some time with some Energy Foundation people in the China pavilion, and they were having a very active and engaged conversation about their own declaration and how they were going to get to the place of solving that. I think the biggest surprise, I would say, and this is my own personal opinion, was India. Because there are a lot of feeling coming into this that India was going to push back so hard that it could undermine an agreement as one of the largest, about the 20, yeah, the 20 largest emitters, and okay, the 20 largest emitters, and it's like a sportscaster where you have people from both ears saying, okay, give him this statistic.
Missed that play! He dropped the ball!
But it was the fact that India not only came to the table, but India came in a very constructive way at the end of the day. I again happen to have some sort of insider knowledge about the fact that the President of the United States worked the phones and worked the presidents, right? And so somebody said to me, well, this is the day that President Obama will call President Xi. This is the day we're going to get, we're going to get closer to an agreement because Barack Obama has invested fully 2 years in his relationship with China. Not just in this is a second term, 4-year sort of legacy issue. This is his investment with China on this issue, and he made the call. And so he talked to Prime Minister Modi, talked to President Xi, but he was working the phone with leaders, and I think, it probably is 20 countries, but the 4 or 5 biggest ones, certainly the French and the way they handled the negotiations, and then the Chinese, the United States, the Indians, and quite frankly, there was some difficulty with South Africa, but they got by that difficulty, and who knows how important that was to Brazil. These are negotiations, right? And so there were opportunities for there to be hold-up artists, and getting those hold-up artists to sort of come on board for 195 countries and to get as much as you got was really this amazing thing.
Well, these negotiations don't occur by vote. There isn't a majority vote or whatever. I mean, it's done by consensus. Dottie Lamb watched this going on at the women's conference, when Hillary made the great statement, women's rights are human rights are women's rights. That's not something everybody in the world would have agreed with at all. But it became a part of the consensus, and you develop a consensus, and if there's some outliers, you put so much political pressure on them, and you really isolate them in such a way that they feel incredibly uncomfortable, and if you're as good as our negotiators were, you make it very uncomfortable for them at home. So the only outliers that really existed in all of this, Nicaragua is always an outlier. No matter what you do, they're going to be an outlier. Cuba was on board, for example. But all of these, you keep them all within the idea of a consensus. And then, as Hunter pointed out, the French understood where the time had come to say, we have a consensus, we have a deal, and slam down the gavel. I mean, that was great politics. Timing is everything. I mean, it was perfect.
In fact, the news reports following the agreement were that none or very few of the delegates in the room even saw the final agreement before that gavel came down. Which was masterful, a masterful job.
Lawrence Tubiana, the French economist who 2 weeks before the COP had her appendix out. And there will be a picture of her in a second standing next to Christiana. Come on. I'll get it to there.
In a surgical gown.
Yeah.
Oh, come on.
Who personally worked all of the delegates. A white-haired woman will come up standing next to Christiana. Hollande deputed her to go to whatever delegation wasn't agreeing and bring pressure on them. The French were absolutely committed to getting this deal. And without them, I don't think we would have gotten a deal. I mean, how many COPs have we been doing? This is 21. And the French said, we're going to get a deal. And they got her done.
All good things got to come to an end. Before we close, I'd like to offer a robust round of applause for these amazing citizens of our state. Thank you. John Powers. John, come up and close with a few words here, if you would, tonight. I just want to thank John for his extraordinary efforts. We look for quietly leadership and amazing vision in the field of sustainability in Colorado. And I'm proud to be a friend of and associated with John Powers. John, thanks for helping make this happen tonight. Any last comments, thoughts, announcements?
Thank you. A couple things I want to respond to tonight. Vote. People say, you know, why vote? The parties are the same. And I want to give you 2 words why you need to vote and why you need to tell everybody else to vote. Supreme Court. There are going to be some nominations coming up, and do you all like Citizens United? Do you like what's being produced by this Supreme Court? Voting is critical and essential, and it's not only the top of the ticket. So every one of you vote, every one of you find 10 people to vote, and make sure you don't stop voting until you get to the last box.
So, I hear you lose. It's 2 against 1.
To the last box. To the last box. Every single one. And get informed. Don't just fill them out because you're going to fill them out, but get them informed. So you got to vote. And the other thing, I really appreciate Tim Worth pointing out how significant divest invest is, and that each of us should divest. But I don't know if you remember, but the Alliance does an annual event, and this past year we honored the woman who founded it, Ellen Dorsey. Now we all hear that 350.org and Bill McKibben, they took it to a new level. They're great, but it was the woman who conceived it. So I want you to know that we are the pickers of leading indicators. This coming year, how many of you have ever heard of Amy Goodman? How many of you watch or follow Democracy Now? Okay. How many of you ever heard of Colorado Independent? Free Speech TV? Open Media? Okay. We need to get these messages out. First was the message maker, Divest, Invest, Ellen Dorsey. This year we're honoring Amy Goodman, April 20th. And this is how we're going to try to weave together independent, nonprofit media to get the message out like we're hearing tonight. So first year, this year, past year, we did Divest Invest. This coming year, we're going to be doing getting the media together or getting the independent, because we're calling our year-long campaign Truth in Media. Each of us has a responsibility coming with the opportunity in this country to have a democracy that we can vote, that we need to make our decisions, all of them, whether they're voting or in our families or in our businesses, with good information. And I was absolutely outraged to think that Planned Parenthood could be vilified by legislators, people that we elect, because they're basing their decisions that represent us on known falsified information. It's known to be falsified. Right? So we have a responsibility to vet and establish the quality of the information that we use to make our decisions. We have an opportunity to hold electeds accountable for how they base their decisions, and we need to get the word out. So look as another leading indicator. Watch for April 20th. Consider coming to hear Amy Goodman, because I can guarantee you, you will not be disappointed. Thank you for coming.